Hello and welcome back. Sleepy What's It here with another miniatures video for you. Today we're going to be taking a look at filling gaps and seams on your miniatures with some new materials and techniques you may not have seen before. One of my most popular videos I released about a year and a half ago now was focused on beginner's guide to gap and seam filling. In that video, I demonstrated two different ways to fill gaps, one using green stuff that works on any material, and another way using plastic cement for hard polystyrene plastics. I think these techniques in these videos are still valuable, especially to beginners, since they depend on only using materials that I would commonly expect hobbyists to have in their arsenal. But since that video, I've been doing some experimenting with a variety of other techniques and materials for gap filling to find a way that I guess was a bit quicker or easier. As well, I've gotten a number of very helpful suggestions from viewers in the comments. So I'm going to be demonstrating two techniques that I found to be, I think, a bit of an improvement. I definitely like using them. The first one we're going to be doing is an advancement on using plastic cement, so it will be specific to polystyrene plastics like those that you see in Games Workshop minis. The previous technique that I demonstrated used plastic cement effectively, melting the existing plastic and reshaping it to fill the gap. So if the pieces were butting up next to each other, this would work totally fine. But if there was any significant amount of gappage, it could take many attempts to kind of melt the plastic to fill the gap, or it may not be possible at all if it's too far apart. So for the new process, we're going to be supplying some material to fill in the gap and fuse it to the plastic instead of trying to use the existing plastic. The basic process I'm going to be demonstrating here is based off of a hobby cheating video by Vince Ventura, which I'll link down below if you want to hear a different explanation and view on it. For this, we're going to need some plastic cement, specifically Tamiya's extra thin, some plastic sprue, and a heavy wire or tin snip. We're going to be making a slurry by melting some of the sprue down in the plastic cement. I'm using an old body of plastic cement here that I've mostly finished up. You could use a different glass container if you prefer and transfer plastic cement to it, which is what Vince does in his video. I like reusing the Tamiya containers since you get the little brush for doing applications for free. To speed up the melting of the sprue, we're going to want to cut it up into a bunch of little nibs, kind of like frit from glasswork. You should use heavy snips like these for doing this instead of your standard precision sprue cutters, so you don't risk dulling or breaking them. After a bunch of snipping, you're going to end up with a pile of nibs that look like this. You want enough to cover the bottom of the bottle, but not so much the plastic is going to be poking out of the liquid. You're just going to kind of get a feel for this. It's better to put in a little bit too little to begin with and have to add more later than have to go the other way around by adding more liquid. Once you put the nibs in, you're going to want to let it sit for a while and melt down, shaking it every so often so that things don't clump up and more plastic can be exposed to the plastic cement. If you put in too much plastic, you can either transfer some plastic cement from another bottle to thin it out a bit, or add a bit of acetone to help it melt down. Once you've got your slurry made, before you use it, you're going to have to give the bottle a good shake, since it does tend to settle out over time. Then you're going to take it out on your brush, apply it to the gaps you want to seal. The mixture that I have here is a little bit thick, since it wasn't melting the model plastic, so it was a little bit saturated, but it still works. The important thing here is we want it to flow into the joints and fill them in with plastic instead of just using plastic cement to try and close the joint. We can wick away the excess using our brush, and then we're just going to let it dry as normal. Once it's dried, you can either use a non-slurred plastic cement or a sanding stick to smooth out the filler if there's any like bump or ridge that needs to be cleaned up. I like using this for large gaps since it fills in the gap in a single pass and you don't need to melt and sand multiple times like you need to do. It's not necessarily better for doing thinner gaps. You can probably still just use unslurried plastic cement then. So after cleaning everything up and then applying a Zenithal Prime to the model, this is what I ended up with. This isn't a perfect gap fill. I probably should have spent a little bit more time cleaning things up, but I definitely gotten rid of that big nasty seam that this model would have had without it. Now we're going to go on to demonstrating the other technique for filling gaps. It's going to work regardless of the material the model is made of. The process is going to be using a UV activated resin to fill the gap. I believe this resin is similar to the resin that's used in modern SLA style 3D printers. The specific product I'm going to be using is called Bondic, though I believe there's similar products available depending on your market. It comes in this applicator pen, which is basically a really big ballpoint pen with a UV light on the backside. So what we're going to do is just apply the resin along the gap that we want to fill. It's slightly thick, but still flowy, so it should wick into the seam, but tends to leave a little bit of excess material on the surface if you, it doesn't just all sink into it. Using a cotton bud or a bit of paper towel, you can clean up the excess off of the surface. It's a little bit tacky, so it sticks to the surface a bit, but also doesn't fall down into larger gaps, so it can fill relatively large gaps for us. Once we have the resin positioned where we want it and cleaned up, we just need to hit it with the UV light for 4 to 5 seconds along the seam to harden it. The manufacturer doesn't explicitly state the wavelength of the light, but given that there isn't any explicit instructions about needing eye protection, I'm assuming that it's on the long wave end of the spectrum, though as with all UV lights, you probably shouldn't be spending a lot of unnecessary time staring at it. Once we've hardened the resin, it is sandable, primable, paintable, etcerable, so we can use an abrasive to just smooth off and shape it as we need it if there's excess. After priming with the Zenithal Highlight, this is what my Stormcast looks like here. The big nasty seam along the shoulders and sides have been closed up, so we can move on to painting. For both of these techniques that I showed in this video, I feel their primary advantage comes in the fact they don't need a lot of fiddling around. They require a single pass to execute. You just fill the gap, let it harden, and then sand it to clean it up. You don't have to spend a lot of time making some putty and putting it into the joint and smoothing it out so it fits right, or multiple passes to get things to seal correctly. Also, once you have your slurry made, both processes can be done in small batches, i.e. immediately as you're building a model, you can just immediately do this to seal up the gaps, instead of having to batch up 10 models and then go gap fill them all at a later time, because it's just really hard to make anything less than too much green stuff. Admittedly, putties like green stuff are incredibly useful if you need to do sculpting of any details into the patch you're doing or anything like that. So it really comes down to what you need out of your gap filling with what techniques you should be using. If you just need to fill the gaps between two ill-fitting pieces and you just want it done fast, I think what I've shown here is a really good way to do it and has become kind of my go-to. So that's about it for this video. I hope that you found this video informative. If you did, please give it a like. If you have your own favorite methods for fixing gaps on minis, comment them down below. Maybe this will turn into a long-running trilogy of videos. Subscribe to the channel if you want to see more videos about miniatures and hobbying in general. If you're looking for a way to support the channel more materially, like help cover the cost of materials or captioning, I do have a Ko-fi account that you can send tips through. Other than that, I look forward to seeing you in the next one.